My brother mocked my inheritance, saying he'd get the house and Dad's business, until the lawyer spoke. I'm Mary Collins, 29 years old, and I've always been the family disappointment. My father never hid his preference for my brother, Andrew, grooming him to take over our family's landscaping business while I was pushed aside. When Dad died unexpectedly, I returned home to Millfield for the will reading, expecting nothing. Andrew publicly mocked me, saying I'd only inherit Dad's garden gnome collection while he'd get everything valuable. But that smirk disappeared when the lawyer started speaking. Growing up in the Collins family meant living in the shadow of Collins Landscaping, a mid-sized but highly respected company my father built from scratch over 25 years. Our family name was on commercial properties and upscale neighborhoods across 3 counties, and Dad made sure everyone knew it was his legacy. Robert Collins was the quintessential self-made man, stubborn, traditional, and firmly believed that his business should pass to his son, not his daughter. My brother Andrew was 4 years older and Dad's pride and joy from day one. While I was taught to be polite and demure, Andrew was encouraged to be assertive and take charge. Dad would take him to job sites from age 7, proudly introducing him as the future of Collins Landscaping. Meanwhile, I was enrolled in piano lessons and cotillion classes because that's what proper young ladies do in small-town Georgia. Mom was my saving grace. Linda Collins was gentle but fiercely intelligent. She had a business degree that she never got to use because Dad insisted she stay home after Andrew was born. She recognized something in me that Dad refused to see, a natural head for numbers and a creative mind that could envision outdoor spaces in ways Andrew never could. She'd sneak business magazines into my room and discuss them with me when Dad wasn't around. Your father means well, she'd tell me, but he's stuck in his generation's thinking. Times are changing, Mary. Women run companies now. Remember that. When I was 15, Mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She fought hard for 18 months, but eventually the disease took her from us. Her death shattered our family in different ways. Dad buried himself deeper in work, becoming even more distant and rigid. Andrew, at 21, started acting out, drinking, partying, showing up late to the office training Dad had arranged for him. For me, losing Mom meant losing my only ally in the house. Without her buffer, Dad's dismissal of my ideas and abilities became even more pronounced. I'd bring home straight A's in math and business classes, and he'd barely glance at my report card. Meanwhile, Andrew's D+ in basic bookkeeping was met with, well, that's why you'll have accountants working for you someday. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I developed a detailed business plan for an eco-friendly landscaping division that could have expanded Collins Landscaping into a booming market. I spent months researching native plants, sustainable irrigation systems, and designing sample gardens. When I finally gathered the courage to show Dad, he flipped through it for less than a minute before pushing it aside. This isn't what we do, Mary. It's sweet that you're interested in the business, but this environmental nonsense is just a trend. Collins Landscaping does traditional, reliable work. Andrew understands that. Andrew, who happened to be lounging in the kitchen, picked up my business plan and laughed. Maybe you should start a little flower shop instead, Mare. You've always been good at playing in the dirt. The moment I turned 18 and graduated high school, I left home. I had saved nearly every dollar from my part-time job since I was 16, and with a small inheritance from my maternal grandmother, I had just enough to move to Atlanta and enroll in business school. Dad seemed almost relieved when I announced I was leaving, as if my presence had always been an uncomfortable reminder that he didn't know how to relate to a daughter. Over the next decade, I built my own path. After college, I worked for a boutique marketing firm for 3 years before branching out on my own. I started with one small office called Collins Creative, a subtle nod to the family name I still carried despite everything. My specialty became social media marketing for small businesses and sustainable brands, exactly the kind of modern approach my father had dismissed. By 28, I had expanded to offices in Atlanta and Savannah, with a growing roster of clients across the Southeast. My business was nothing compared to Collins Landscaping's scale, but it was profitable, innovative, and completely mine. I created it without the Collins name opening doors for me, without my father's connections or capital. During those years, my contact with family dwindled to almost nothing. I'd send Dad a Christmas card and receive a formal, secretary-penned response. Andrew called occasionally, usually when he was drunk, to boast about contracts he'd closed or to check if I was still playing with computers. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had married a woman named Brittany from a wealthy local family, a union that Dad apparently heartily approved of. I built a new life with new friends who knew nothing of Colin's landscaping or my estrangement from my family. I dated occasionally but always found myself holding back, afraid to fully trust anyone. After growing up feeling so thoroughly dismissed by my own father, my business became my primary relationship, something I could pour my heart into that actually gave back what I put in. The call came on a Thursday morning in March. I was in the middle of reviewing campaign analytics for a major client when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize from my hometown. Something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Is this Mary Collins?" a somber male voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "This is William Harris, your father's attorney. I'm sorry to inform you that Robert Collins passed away last night from a heart attack. He was at home, and the doctors say it was quick." The analytics report slipped from my fingers, scattering across the floor in an explosion of charts and graphs. A heart attack. Quick. The words echoed in my mind as I tried to process what they meant. My father, the indomitable Robert Collins, was gone. "Miss Collins, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here," I managed to say. "I'm just surprised. He was only 6 to 6. 6 to 7, actually," Harris corrected gently. "His birthday was last month." I felt a pang of guilt. I hadn't remembered his birthday. When was the last time I had? 3 years ago? 4? "The funeral is scheduled for Saturday," he continued. "Your brother thought you should know." Andrew thought I should know. Not that Andrew wanted me there, just that I should be informed. The distinction was clear. "I'll be there," I said, surprised by my own quick decision. "Thank you for calling, Mr. Harris." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk for nearly an hour. The emotions washing over me were complex and contradictory. Grief, certainly, he was my father, after all. But also a hollow emptiness for the relationship we never had, the approval I never received. And underneath it all, a strange sense of finality. Whatever chance we had to reconcile was gone forever. I arranged for my assistant to handle operations for the next week and booked a flight back to Millfield, the small town outside Augusta where I'd grown up. As the plane descended through clouds heavy with spring rain, I gazed out at the familiar pine forests and felt like I was traveling back in time rather than just across state lines. The rental car I picked up at the airport seemed too new and shiny for the journey into my past. I drove the familiar route to my childhood home with a growing sense of unreality. 11 years had passed since I'd last seen this house, a sprawling ranch-style home that Dad had built when his business first became successful, when I was just 6 years old. The house looked smaller than I remembered and noticeably less maintained. The once immaculate lawn was patchy in spots, the flower beds were overgrown, and several shutters hung askew. Dad had always been meticulous about the property's appearance. This neglect spoke volumes. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering courage before finally approaching the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal Andrew. My brother had changed dramatically. The athletic build I remembered had given way to a substantial beer gut, and his once thick hair was thinning despite expensive-looking treatments. His face was puffy, with broken capillaries across his nose and cheeks, suggesting years of heavy drinking. Well, Mayor finally returns," he said, blocking the doorway. "Thought you might not bother coming at all." "Hello, Andrew," I said evenly. "I'm sorry about Dad." He gave a dismissive wave. "Yeah, well, he was asking about you the week before, wondering if you'd ever come home. Guess you're too late now." The barb hit its mark, but I kept my expression neutral. "May I come in?" He stepped aside reluctantly. "Brittany's in the living room with some of Dad's business associates. Try not to embarrass the family name." The interior of the house was like a time capsule, with the same heavy furniture and wood paneling I remembered from childhood. The only differences were the layer of dust on less used surfaces and the smell of cigarettes and something sour underneath, perhaps spilled beer that hadn't been properly cleaned. In the living room, a group of middle-aged men in suits stood talking in low voices, while a blonde woman directed a caterer where to place a tray of sandwiches. She looked up as I entered, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to a practiced social smile. "Oh, what a surprise," Brittany said, approaching with arms outstretched for an air kiss that never quite made contact with my cheek. "Andrew wasn't sure you'd make it." "I just heard yesterday," I explained. "How are you holding up?" "Oh, managing. Someone has to keep things running," she said with a pointed glance toward Andrew, who had already helped himself to what was clearly not his first drink of the day. Robert's death was so unexpected. The business needs leadership now more than ever. One of the men approached, extending his hand. Tom Bradley. I worked with your father for 15 years. You must be the daughter from Atlanta. The daughter from Atlanta. Not Mary, not the business owner, just the daughter who left. I shook his hand and nodded. Robert mentioned you had some kind of agency, he continued, clearly struggling to show interest. 2 offices, actually. Digital marketing and brand strategy. Ah, interesting hobby. Before I could correct him, Andrew interrupted, his voice raised to address the room. Everyone, the funeral home called, they need us to bring Dad's suit within the hour. Brittany, can you handle that? I need to speak with Bradley about the Henderson contract. The message was clear. Business continued, and Andrew was in charge. I was just a visitor expected to stay out of the way. The funeral passed in a blur of somber faces and polite condolences from people who barely remembered me or only knew me as Robert's girl who moved away. Andrew delivered a eulogy that focused primarily on Dad's business acumen and the legacy he was proud to continue. I wasn't asked to speak, which was both a relief and a final reminder of my outsider status. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 o'clock the day after the funeral at the offices of Harris & Associates. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple black dress and the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. The law office occupied the ground floor of one of Millfield's historic buildings, with wood-paneled walls and windows that had witnessed nearly a century of the town's legal proceedings. William Harris greeted me at the reception area. He was older than I expected, well into his 70s, with sparse grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his kind blue eyes. Miss Collins, thank you for coming. I was your father's attorney for over 30 years, and I knew your grandfather before him. He led me to a conference room where several people were already seated. Andrew and Brittany occupied chairs at the far end of the table. Andrew was wearing an expensive suit that strained across his midsection, while Brittany was dressed in a black designer outfit that seemed more appropriate for a country club luncheon than a will reading in small-town Georgia. Tom Bradley was there along with 2 other men I recognized from the house. A woman in her 60s sat quietly in the corner, Martha Stevens, Dad's longtime housekeeper. She gave me a small, sad smile when our eyes met. Now that everyone is here, we can begin, Harris said, taking his seat at the head of the table. He placed a leather portfolio in front of him and adjusted his glasses. Before I read Robert's last will and testament, he asked me to play this recording. Harris pressed a button on a small digital recorder. After a moment of static, my father's voice filled the room. If you're listening to this, then I'm gone. Never was one for long goodbyes or emotional speeches, so I'll keep this brief. I built Collins Landscaping from nothing. Worked every day of my life to make it something to be proud of. Made mistakes along the way, especially with people. Business was always easier to understand than family. There was a pause, and I heard him clear his throat. I've made my decisions about the distribution of my estate carefully. Bill has all the documents in order. Some of you might be surprised, others won't. All I ask is that you respect my wishes, even if you don't understand them. The recording ended. Andrew shifted in his seat, looking impatient. Brittany placed a manicured hand on his arm, her expression calculating. I'll now read the will, Harris said, opening the portfolio. Harris began with the standard legal preamble before getting to the specific bequests. Martha, the housekeeper, received a generous sum that brought tears to her eyes. Dad's fishing boat on Lake Sinclair went to Tom Bradley, his oldest friend. There were smaller bequests to various employees and charitable organizations. As these minor items were addressed, Andrew grew increasingly agitated, drumming his fingers on the table. Brittany kept shooting glances at her watch. Can we get to the important parts? Andrew finally interrupted. We all know the house and the company are coming to me. No need to drag this out. Harris paused, looking at Andrew over the rim of his glasses. If you'll allow me to proceed in the proper order, Mr. Collins. Fine, fine. Just hurry it up. Andrew turned to me with a smirk. Sorry, Mayor. I know you came all this way, but you'll be heading back to your little office soon enough. Dad's leaving you his garden gnome collection, right? The one Mom started for you. My stomach tightened. The garden gnome collection had been a point of contention throughout my childhood. Mom had given me my first ceramic gnome when I was 7, and it became a tradition, one new gnome each birthday. After she died, I'd left the collection behind, unable to bear the reminder of her absence. Dad had apparently kept it all these years. I'm getting the house and the business, Andrew continued loudly, looking around the table as if seeking appreciation for his generosity. She just gets the gnomes. Seems fair considering she abandoned the family. Brittany tittered, and even Tom Bradley gave an uncomfortable chuckle. The humiliation burned through me, but I kept my expression neutral, refusing to give Andrew the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Actually, Harris said, his voice suddenly sharp, if you'd allow me to continue, there are some details you might find relevant. Andrew waved a dismissive hand. Go ahead, read the part where Dad makes me CEO. Harris cleared his throat and continued reading from the document. To my son, Andrew Robert Collins, I leave my collection of vintage trucks, valued at approximately $400,000, and a 20% non-controlling interest in Collins Landscaping. The room went silent. Andrew's face froze mid-smirk. 20%, he finally sputtered. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake, Harris said calmly. If you'll allow me to finish. What about the house? The company? Who gets controlling interest? Andrew's voice had risen nearly to a shout. Harris adjusted his glasses again, his expression unreadable. To my daughter, Mary Elizabeth Collins, I leave the family residence at 847 Magnolia Drive, my personal effects, and my controlling interest in Collins Landscaping, consisting of 80% of outstanding shares. The world seemed to stop. I stared at Harris, certain I had misheard him. Me? Dad had left me the company? This is ridiculous. Andrew was on his feet now, face purple with rage. Dad built that company for me. He trained me to run it. She hasn't even been here for 11 years. Mr. Collins, please calm yourself, Harris said. There's more to explain. I don't need explanations. I need you to fix this obvious mistake. Andrew slammed his fist on the table. She knows nothing about landscaping. She makes websites for crying out loud. Actually, Harris said, his voice cutting through Andrew's tirade, the company was never entirely in your father's name to leave to anyone. It was structured as a partnership with your mother, initially, and later transferred partially to Mary when she turned 18. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as though I'd stepped into an alternate reality. What are you talking about? I finally managed to ask. Harris removed another document from the portfolio. Collins Landscaping was legally established as a partnership between Robert and Linda Collins from its founding. When your mother passed away, her shares were held in trust until you reached adulthood, at which point partial ownership legally transferred to you. That's impossible, Andrew said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Dad ran the company. Everyone knows that. Robert managed the company as the majority partner and designated trustee, Harris explained, but he never owned it outright. This arrangement was your mother's idea, actually, a way to protect the company and ensure Mary's future security. Why would he put it in Mary's name and not mine? Andrew demanded. According to your father, because Mary showed the business acumen and responsibility he felt necessary for ownership, Harris looked at me. He's been following your career with great interest, Miss Collins. He was quite impressed with how you built your own successful business without any family assistance. Brittany, who had been whispering frantically to Andrew, suddenly turned to me with a wide, insincere smile. Mary, we should discuss this as a family. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement that benefits everyone. There's nothing to discuss, Harris interjected. The ownership is legally established and has been for years. Robert simply never informed either of you of the full arrangement. I'll contest it, Andrew threatened, looking wildly around the room. This can't be legal. You're welcome to try, Harris said mildly. But I assure you, every document is in order. Your father was meticulous about his legal affairs. While Andrew continued to bluster and threaten, I sat in stunned silence. All those years feeling dismissed and undervalued, and Dad had legally entrusted me with his life's work. It made no sense. And yet, as I thought back to my mother's quiet insistence that I learn about business, her smuggled magazines and lessons, I wondered if she had known all along. There must be some mistake, I finally said, my voice hardly more than a whisper. There is no mistake, Miss Collins, Harris assured me. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. As the reality of the situation sank in, I couldn't help but notice the dramatic shift in how people were looking at me. Tom Bradley, who had dismissed my business as a hobby just days before, was now studying me with newfound respect. Martha, the housekeeper, was smiling openly. Even Brittany's attitude had transformed. She was now trying to catch my eye, nodding encouragingly whenever I glanced her way. Only Andrew remained hostile, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "This isn't over," he hissed as Harris wrapped up the meeting. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Mayor." As we all filed out of the conference room, I felt dizzy with the implications of what had just happened. Not only was I suddenly the owner of a substantial landscaping company, but I had apparently been a partial legal owner for years without knowing it. The family home was mine. The legacy Dad had always implied was Andrew's birthright had legally been mine since I was 18. The irony was almost too much to bear. All those years of feeling like I didn't matter, and Dad had quietly placed his entire legacy in my hands. I couldn't stop thinking about the absurdity of it all as I watched Andrew storm out of the office, Brittany hurrying behind him, already on her phone, likely calling their lawyer. "Miss Collins, if you have a moment," William Harris gestured for me to return to the conference room after the others had departed. "There are some additional matters we should discuss privately." Still dazed, I followed Harris back inside. He closed the door and took a seat beside me rather than across the table, creating a more intimate atmosphere. "I imagine you have questions," he said, removing his glasses and polishing them with a handkerchief. "About $1 million, I admitted. How long has this arrangement been in place? Did Mom know? Why didn't Dad ever tell me?" Harris replaced his glasses and folded his hands on the table. "The company partnership was established in your mother's name in 1985, the year you were born. It was her idea, actually. Linda was a remarkably intelligent woman with excellent business instincts." The revelation that this had been Mom's idea brought tears to my eyes. All those secret business lessons suddenly made sense. She had been preparing me. "When Linda became ill," Harris continued, "she and your father revised their estate plan. The ownership of the company would transfer progressively to you upon reaching adulthood, but Robert would continue to manage it until he deemed you ready or until his death." "But why keep it secret? Why let me believe I meant nothing to the business?" Harris paused thoughtfully. "Your father was a complicated man, Mary. He believed in testing people, making them prove themselves. When you left home and started your own business, he saw it as confirmation that you had the necessary drive and independence." "He could have told me," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. All those years of feeling worthless in his eyes. "Robert was not adept at expressing his feelings," Harris acknowledged, "but he was immensely proud of what you accomplished on your own. He followed your career closely, subscribed to business magazines where your work was featured, kept newspaper clippings about your agency's growth. He reached into his portfolio and withdrew a folded newspaper article, a feature on Collins Creative from 2 years ago when I landed my biggest client. The paper was worn at the creases, as if it had been unfolded and reread many times. He carried this in his wallet," Harris said softly. I took the article with trembling hands, noticing my father's fingerprints still visible on the edges of the paper. The thought of him secretly keeping track of my career, perhaps even feeling proud, was overwhelming. "There's something else you should know," Harris continued. "Your father began to have serious concerns about Andrew's management of the company about 3 years ago. Andrew was making impulsive decisions, taking on unprofitable projects, and using company funds for personal expenses. Is that why the property looks so run down?" Harris nodded gravely. "The company's financial position has been deteriorating. Robert tried to mentor Andrew, to rein him in, but their relationship became increasingly strained. In the last year, your father effectively resumed day-to-day control to prevent further damage." "Does Andrew have debts? Is that what this is about?" "I'm afraid so. Your brother has accumulated significant personal debt, gambling, primarily, though there are also expensive purchases and questionable investments. He was counting on inheriting control of the company to solve his financial problems." The pieces were falling into place. Andrew's desperate reaction now made sense. He needed the company to bail him out of trouble he'd created. Harris reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. "Robert asked me to give you this privately." I took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. "Mr. Harris, why would Dad create this elaborate arrangement but never tell me? It makes no sense." The elderly attorney considered the question carefully. "I've known your father since we were in college together, Mary. He was always methodical, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I believe he wanted to see what you would do on your own, without the Collins name opening doors for you. He wanted to be certain you had earned the responsibility. After Harris departed, I remained in the conference room, staring at the envelope from my father. Finally, I took a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Dad's precise handwriting. Mary, if you're reading this, then Bill has explained the arrangements concerning the company and the house. I owe you an explanation, though I'm not sure you'll understand or forgive me. When you were born, your mother made me promise that you would always be secure, that you would have opportunities regardless of the world's prejudices against women in business. The legal arrangement was her idea initially, but as you grew, I came to see her wisdom. You have your mother's sharp mind and my stubbornness, a powerful combination. I recognized it early, but I was afraid. Afraid that if I acknowledged your potential, you would never develop the hunger to prove yourself, the resilience necessary to succeed in a difficult industry. So I pushed you away. I let you believe you had no place in the legacy I was building. It was cruel, and I regret the pain it caused you. But watching you build your own business, seeing your success earned entirely through your own merit, confirmed what Linda always knew. You were the right choice to carry on Collins Landscaping. Andrew has his strengths, but business sense isn't among them. The company would not survive his leadership, a fact I realized too late. I've made many mistakes, Mary. My greatest was never telling you how proud I am of the woman you've become. Not because of anything I did, but despite it. The company is yours. It always has been. Dad. Tears flowed freely as I read his words. The father I thought had never valued me had been watching all along, had been proud of me. The revelation was both healing and painful, healing to know I had mattered to him, painful to think of the relationship we might have had if only he'd been able to tell me while he was alive. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated lobby of Collins Landscaping headquarters. The outdated wood paneling had been replaced with a bright, modern design that incorporated sustainable materials and local artwork. The company logo remained the same, but beneath it now read, "Rooted in tradition, growing toward the future." Andrew had completed a rehabilitation program for gambling addiction and, true to my word, I offered him an entry-level position in the company. He started in the estimating department, learning the fundamental calculations that underpin successful project management, skills Dad should have insisted he master years ago. Our relationship would always carry the scars of our upbringing, but we were slowly rebuilding trust. The business was thriving under my leadership, combining Dad's traditional expertise with the innovative approaches I'd learned in Atlanta. Sometimes the greatest gift we receive isn't what we're given, but what we learn about ourselves in the process of earning it. I had inherited a company, but I had built the character needed to run it. I had inherited a name, but I had created my own reputation. The garden gnomes Andrew had mocked? They now sat in a place of honor in my office, not as a reminder of childhood dismissal, but as symbols of my mother's love and my father's complicated but genuine pride. Sometimes the things others dismiss as insignificant carry the deepest value of all.